Hello students, we shall take up history from today. History unit number 1. The lesson is Advent of Europeans to India. In this lesson, we learn the trade and commerce relationship India had with European countries, the arrival of Europeans to India for trade, the Carnatic Wars, the 3 Carnatic Wars which are fought in the backdrop of European political developments, and 2 great battles, the Battle of Plassey 1757 and the Battle of Buxar 1764, and a new system of government called the dual government system introduced by Robert Clive, and further the aggressive policy of the British policy of aggression. There was trade and commerce relationship between India and Europe since ancient times. Since ancient times, there is a trade and commerce relationship between India and Europe. There was great demand for Indian spices like pepper, cardamom, ginger, and many other spices in Europe. So it means many Indian spices were in great demand in Europe. The trade relations between India, Europe, and other Asian countries continued even during the Middle Ages. The Arab merchants carried Asian merchandise into Constantinople of Eastern Roman Empire, also called Byzantine Empire. This is Byzantine Empire. The Arab merchants carried Asian goods, Asian merchandise into Constantinople of Eastern Roman Empire, also known as Byzantine Empire. The Italian merchants further would buy these goods and then sell them in European countries. The Italian merchants would buy these goods, then sell them in European countries. The city of Constantinople was thus the center of international trade and was considered as the gateway of European trade. So which city was called the gateway of European trade? Constantinople. Constantinople was the center of international trade and therefore prominently called the gateway of European trade. The Arab merchants had gained monopoly over trade in Asian countries. Monopoly means total control, absence of competitor. And the Italian merchants, the Italian traders had gained monopoly over the European trade. So who monopolized the Asian trade? Arab merchants. Who had monopolized the European trade? The Italian traders. The merchandise goods that went off from Asia brought good amount of profits to the Italian merchants. It means the Italian merchants gained huge profit out of the merchandise from Asia. The trade and commerce between Asia and Europe was taking place through the city of Constantinople. Constantinople was therefore the main center or hub of trade. 53. Ottoman Turks captured the city of Constantinople. So, the year 1453 is considered to be an important turning point in the not only in the history but also in the history of trade between East and West. Ottoman Turks captured the city of Constantinople in 1453. What was the effect of this? As a result, all the trade routes connecting the city of Constantinople came under the control of Turks. What was the result of capture of Constantinople by Ottoman Turks in 1453? As a result of this capture of Constantinople by Ottoman Turks in 1453, all the trade routes connecting the city of Constantinople came under the control of Turks. Now, having taken control of Constantinople, the Turks started levying too many taxes, very heavy taxes on all the goods passing through these routes. The Turks started levying too many taxes on the merchandise, on the goods passing through these routes. As a result, the trade became unprofitable. It was very much profitable earlier. After the Turks started levying heavy taxes on goods, the trade became most unprofitable. Meanwhile, Spain and Portugal were attempting to break the monopoly of Italian traders. Spain and Portugal also wanted to have a share of profit which the Italian traders were enjoying. Therefore, they started encouraging their sailors, navigators, to find a new sea route to India. Added to this, the invention of certain scientific devices such as mariner's compass, astrolabe, and gunpowder, they provided further encouragement, further inspiration, further impetus to this venture. So, invention of instruments like compass, astrolabe, and gunpowder provided further impetus to this venture. Vasco da Gama, a Portuguese sailor, left from Lisbon and reached a village called Kapadu near Calicut on the western coast of India in the year 1498. Thus, he was successful in discovering a new sea route to India. Who discovered the new sea route to India? Vasco da Gama, a Portuguese sailor. In the year 1498, Vasco da Gama reached a village called Kapadu near Calicut on the west coast of India. So this was the route followed by the Portuguese sailor Vasco da Gama to reach India. And this route continued to be the route of trade between India and Europe for many years. So the Portuguese were the first to re-establish trade route between India and Europe. So with the success of the Portuguese, the other Europeans, namely the Dutch, the French and the English, arrived in India for trade. And this development not only changed the history of India but also changed the history of European countries. The Portuguese were the first to arrive in India for trade and were also the last to leave India by sea route. Who were the Europeans who arrived in India through sea route for the first time? It was the Portuguese, and it was again the Portuguese who left India last by sea route. After Vasco da Gama, as his successor, Francisco Almeida arrived in India as the Portuguese viceroy. Who was the successor of Vasco da Gama as the Portuguese viceroy of India? It was Francisco Almeida. What was his greatest contribution? Francisco Almeida implemented blue water policy. What is the main objective of this policy? His main aim was in order to establish supremacy over the sea instead of supremacy over the land. So keeping this in view, Francisco Almeida implemented the blue water policy. After him, Alfonso de Albuquerque came after Francisco Almeida, and Francisco Almeida and after him Alfonso Albuquerque, and Alfonso Albuquerque is considered to be the real founder of Portuguese Empire in India. Who is considered to be the real founder of Portuguese Empire in India? Alfonso de Albuquerque, who came to India after Francisco Almeida. What is his greatest achievement after coming to India? Francisco Almeida waged a battle against the Sultan of Bijapur in the year 1510. After a fierce battle in 1510, he won Goa. Goa was under the control of Sultan of Bijapur. After a fierce battle, Alfonso Albuquerque won Goa in the year 1510. By then, Portuguese had absolute monopoly over trade with India for almost a century. For nearly about a century, Portuguese enjoyed absolute monopoly over trade with India. But their power started declining in India with the arrival of the English and the French. The next European country is Dutch. The Dutch are from Holland or Netherlands. Dutch are from Holland or Netherlands. The Dutch established their United East India Company. The United East India Company of the Dutch, Holland, was established in the year 1602 with the aim of doing business with Eastern countries and came to India, Java, Sumatra, and Indonesia. The Dutch built their storehouses, warehouses, where they would protect their goods. They are called warehouses. The Dutch built their warehouses at Surat, Broch, Cambay, Cochin, Nagapatnam, Machilipatnam, and Chinsura. So these were the places where the Dutch built their warehouses. And with this, the Dutch broke the monopoly of the Portuguese in India. Till then, the Portuguese enjoyed monopoly over Indian trade. With the arrival of the Dutch, the monopoly of the Portuguese in India was broken. Later, unable to face the competition from the English and the French, even the Dutch limited themselves to the Spice Islands of Indonesia. So the Dutch also had to face competition from the English and French who came later. So therefore they limited themselves to the Spice Islands in Indonesia. The arrival of the British East India Company in India, 1600, was the English. On 31st December 1600, Queen Elizabeth, the Queen at that time, issued a royal charter, permission, license. A royal charter was issued by Her Highness the Queen Elizabeth, authorizing the East India Company to trade with the eastern countries for 15 years. Charter is permission, a license, which was issued by Queen Elizabeth to the English East India Company to trade, permitting the East India Company to trade with the eastern countries for a period of 15 years. So the charter, the license was valid for 15 years. And the East India Company started its business formally in the year 1613. When did the Queen issue a royal charter to the East India Company? In the year 1600. And the English East India Company officially, formally started their business in the year 1613. Jahangir, the Mughal emperor, issued a royal permission to the English to establish their first warehouse, first factory at Surat. Sir Thomas Roe, an English royal ambassador who arrived at the court of Jahangir. Sir Thomas Roe arrived at the court of Jahangir as the royal ambassador from the court of James I, and he sought permission from Jahangir to establish factories in other places of Mughal Empire. The English established their factories at Agra, Ahmedabad and Broch. In the year 1639, the English took Madras from the king of Chandragiri and established a strong fort named Saint Fort George. So, the British established their first settlement in Madras after taking over Madras from the king of Chandragiri in the year 1639, and they named the strong fort built by them as Fort St. George. St. George Fort was the fort built by the British at Madras. Later, Charles II, the Prince of England, gave Bombay on an annual rent of rupees 10 pounds to the East India Company in 1668. In 1690, the English purchased Sutanauti, Kalikata and Govindapur on the banks of Hooghly and built Fort William. The city of Calcutta grew around this fort. Today, one major town of India, Calcutta, was near villages on the banks of river Hooghly. Satanauti, Calcutta and Govindapura were purchased by the English, and later they built a strong fort there called Fort St. William, Fort St. George in Madras, Fort St. William in Calcutta, and around this fort the city of Calcutta grew. By 17th century, the English had established Bombay, Madras and Calcutta as their centers of presidencies. So these Bombay, Madras and Calcutta became major presidencies of the British. By the later part of 18th century, English made Calcutta their capital city. Very important. Which was the capital city of the British Empire? Calcutta became the capital city and it grew very fast. And they implemented their own civil and criminal procedure codes, civil and criminal laws in the areas that were under their control. French East India Company. French East India Company started as a government-owned company in the year 1664. The French built their first factory at Surat in the year 1668. Later, they also built their factories at Machilipatnam, Chandranagore, Mahe, Karaikal, Kasim Bazar and Balasore. So the French East India Company was established in the year 1664. It was a government-owned company and the French established their first factory at Surat in 1668. Later, they also built their factories at Machilipatnam, Chandranagore, Mahe, Karaikal, Kasim Bazar and Balasore. In the year 1674, the French took a place called Valigandapuram from a local Muslim official and which they later developed it as a major trading center. And the same Valigandapuram later became very popularly known as Pondicherry. And later Pondicherry was the capital of the French in India? Duplex arrived in Pondicherry as the Governor General of the French. Who was the first Governor General, French Governor General to India? The first French Governor General to India was Duplex, and had high ambitions of establishing the French as a major power in South India. When Duplex arrived in India as the first French Governor General, he had high ambitions of establishing the French as a major power in South India. And this ambition of the French, this ambition of Duplex, led to the Carnatic Wars with the English. We will continue this lesson in the second period, and assignment for today is: what were the Indian spices that were in demand in Europe? Which was the center of international trade? What was Constantinople called as? Who had monopolized the Asian trade? Who had monopolized the trade in Europe? When was the city of Constantinople captured? Who captured the city of Constantinople? What was the result of capture of Constantinople? Who was the Portuguese sailor who discovered sea route to India? And where did Vasco da Gama reach in India in the year 1498? That's all for today. We will continue the lesson in the next period. Thank you, students.